last but not least, so we already talked about safety processes and methodologies and best practices, which fantastically ties up to bring us to the next talk, which is from Daniel and Dana. And they are going to have a first look of how can we implement those in our EMO process.
Thank you, Sarah. Very brief and starting point kind of look. I'm Daniel. I'm working for ETAS these days, and I've been with this SDV initiative from like day one, so it's kind of close to my heart. I have the honor of having Dana along today. She's the Eclipse process quality engineer expert.
Hi, everybody, and good afternoon. Trying to wake you up from
Over
the
to
lunch
Dana in a
time.
minute because she actually knows what she's talking about. All right, so we actually today, this is not going to be a presentation where we give you like, whatever 5 points that we will now do and then we're going to be safe or anything like that. We wanted to take today as an opportunity to look at two words in the Eclipse SDV mission statement that have been there since day one, but nobody really knows what the heck they are supposed to mean, really. So automotive grade, that's what we do, right? We do auto grade software, right? So what does that mean? By the way, we don't have the answer today, but we want to essentially start the conversation and use this event today to maybe form something like one of our working group breakout groups to begin defining and figuring out what we mean when we say autograde. This is a very, again, high-level starting thought picture that I brought to my mind. That is to show what autograde, essentially for an open source project, what autograde could mean or should mean. So this is, like simplest possible supply chain, like for software elements. Get upstream stuff, you integrate that into a solution, you do a product release, you get a product. You have to maintain and support that, obviously. For automotive grade and open source, in my mind, again, this is a starting point. This is a discussion starter. I'm not saying that this is the one truth, but in my mind, the goal that we should kind of aim for if we discuss automotive grade is we need to make our projects, our code bases, our elements as easy to use as possible for downstream commercial product builders, right? If we manage that, and by easy to use, that also means like our artifacts become easy to use in the context of something like product certification, what Florian spoke about, right? The Rust project upstream does have a bunch of discipline, process, etc. in place that actually made it possible to do what Ferrocene did. I'm not saying that every project that we do has to get to that level, but the pattern, I think, that's the core of what automotive grade software in open source might boil down to. And that's why I hand over to Dana. I'll wrap this up later with a couple of pointers to other communities and activities, just so your awareness both ways. But now it's Dana's turn for a bit more details.
So as Daniel was saying, based on the statements that we made as a work group, what we are actually aiming for is to define an Eclipse SDV process that would be applicable to all the SDV projects within our work group. And the main two reasons for doing so is to increase the project success by being adopted, by being seen better, by being more easier integrated into whatever systems or subsystems that might take them on board, and also to be part of the automotive industry's innovation. Because, if you're not a player, you're not part of it, right? So with that in mind, I would like to take you a little bit through what the current state is and what triggers our motivation into doing this. And secondly, what would be the desired state and the potential future by taking this journey. So just as a big picture, this is our current state today. There's loads of OEMs, loads of tiers, 1, 2, 3, God knows how many. And there are loads of smaller groups, smaller open source communities, just like ours. Now, unfortunately, Okay, we have our Eclipse SDV in there as well, where we do have a lot more collaboration between the open source groups, but also the OEMs and tiers. However, typically what we do have is either the OEMs structured a lot more together with the tiers and collaborating a lot more, and the open source guys sort of like left on the side. And the main reason for this current situation is the fact that those two types of people, so OEMs and tiers, they kind of speak the same language. And that language comes from these three definitions. One is the standard, the other one is the compliance, and the third one would be the certification. So, firstly, we have the standard, which again is not a law, it's just a collection of best practices. We have the compliance, which is the management of the management system that fully adheres to the requirements presented in the respective standard, whichever it might be. And then we have the certification, which actually proves that whatever product you have built complies with the standard. Now, these three standards are the main standards that are being dealt with in the automotive industry at the moment. And these would be automotive spice, automotive functional safety, and automotive cybersecurity. And like you probably noticed already, I've put the automotive in front of each of them because that's what their actual name is. And all three of them have been derived from higher level standards. Those standards have been already on the market for quite some time. Only the automotive industry players, mainly the established companies, they felt like the originally intended standards, the generic ones, weren't detailed enough for the automotive sector, which is why they went into the actual standards and standardizing organizations to develop more specific standards for the automotive sector. Again, I'm going to underline that these are just collections of best practices and guidance. They are not the law. Okay. Now, as part of the same current picture, we have a look at the OSS community. Again, they are pretty much probably synced together, but not so much in connection with the OEMs and the tiers, unfortunately. This is something that we as well are looking into changing. And taking the same route as with the OEMs and tiers, these are mainly, let's say, processes or standards that the OSS contributors and committers are applying. First would be the OSPOs that are defined through the different communities. And secondly would be, in our case, the Eclipse Foundation development process. Now, these, let's call them guidances or standards processes, they don't focus so much on the actual content of the projects, but rather on the governance of the projects. You know, like ensuring there's meritocracy, ensuring there's non-competitiveness, vendor neutrality, and all that good stuff. But they don't go into the actual contents of the projects that we create. And looking into the future, this would be the picture that we would like to see. So everybody joined, everybody working together, collaborating, exchanging information, and never mind whether you are OEM or tier or just an OSS contributor. And in order to do that, we would need, we think, we would need to have on top of the OSPOs and the Eclipse Foundation development process, we would also need to have an Eclipse SDV process. This one would be more, again, a collection of best practices, of like really low level best practices, something that is quickly achievable through the projects that we put out there, but would also meet some of the needs of the actual automotive industry, finally of the OEMs. So when we talk about this, we mean more content quality related processes again. And as conclusions, what we aim for, again, is to define and apply, because obviously the definition without appliance doesn't make sense, a set of best practices that can bring our OS projects closer to being certification ready. So as you heard Daniel speaking before, automotive grade, I'm going to underline, we are not going to certify the project, but bringing them closer to being certification ready, that is our aim. And obviously we need your support on that. We also want to ensure continuous compliance. So it's not enough that for the first iteration, so let's say for the first release of a project, we have the appliance of this newly defined process, but rather that we keep on doing that. So we increase the quality of the end product. And finally, we want through this to improve the project's adoption and success. So we'll also have in development a set of badges for the different points that we'll define in the process. So whenever a project is displayed on our page, you're going to see a full badges display as well with everything that the respective project is adhering to from the defined process. So benefits to this would be, first of all, the focus would rather be on content quality than on the actual certifications. And again, I know everybody's crazy about certifications nowadays, but the content is what leads you to a certifiable product. And secondly, also the automotive companies together with the OS community will be speaking the same language, which is going to be quite a big gap to overcome. And now I'm gonna get back to Daniel here to give us more examples about similar initiatives in the world.
Right, thank you, Dana. Just to wrap this up, because we are not the first ones to have those kinds of thoughts, obviously, and I do think it's valuable, especially for this kind of particular interest topic, right, to not fragment humanity's attention further. It's fragmented enough already. So I'll go through a couple of things, and this is not exhaustive. This is just a couple of examples. I go through a couple of things that are also happening in that kind of space right now. Maybe with one or two ideas what we might do with them in the future. So this is essentially just me pointing to other people's work, just to be clear about this. So one thing, obviously, like a big elephant in this specific room, is the Linux Foundation ELISA initiative. I recently learned that ELISA actually is an acronym enabling Linux in safety applications, I guess. And ELISA has been around for some time, and there's been a predecessor project with a more complicated name that's been, around for even longer. But in a nutshell, it does feel, at least to me, in certain instances, in certain areas, that ELISA is now, as of Q2 this year, actually beginning to pick up some speed again. So there's working groups there that are now, renewing focus on creating, well, outcomes, results, documentation system, architecture pictures that can then be used for safety analysis, etc. And for those who have not come across ELISA, essentially they are looking at how can we even theorize and talk about a big product level system that includes a lot of open source artifacts. I mean, Linux is the big block in the middle, obviously, complexity point of view, but it's not restricted to Linux. So Cephere is part of that story of that bigger picture. Virtualization is in there. And essentially, ELISA have defined a bunch of industry-specific use case patterns or use case scenarios, based on these blocks. And now work is beginning, for example, in the OSEP, in the Open Source Engineering Process Working Group, work is beginning to actually do the analysis of one specific system, create the artifacts step by step. And this will take some while yet, but that might be one opportunity for them and us in a year or two maybe to come together, because if they create the theory and let's say the first order of artifacts for analyzing such a system, well, maybe our community and the working group can actually pick this up and do an actual product certification, even if it's just a make do hello world product. But that might be better than nothing, which is what we have right now. I mentioned Zephyr already. Zephyr is also right now hosting a safety working group. And so I'm pointing to the web page / the meeting minutes that they have. They are looking into what might have to be done to get Zephyr certifiable for safety applications. I'm not part of that, so I don't know how far they are. But again, just to point out other people's work here. This is an interesting one. And we will have somebody from the Linux Foundation and or Nicole herself speaking about this in one of our tech sessions soon. Essentially, there's a nice presentation from Nicole Papler at the FOSDEM earlier this year, and where she is talking about using the SPDX data format and toolchain to not only transport SBOM, license, etc., information through the supply chain, but also can be used that to transport relevant safety artifacts through that supply chain. That's interesting. Again, I can't really explain the slides. I just copied 2 out of Nicole's presentation here with her permission. If you're interested, look at her presentation. And again, in a couple of weeks, I guess we'll have either Nicole or Kate from the Linux Foundation talk to us about the SPDX work that's going on there. It's interesting. And I think it will be core tooling for what we might do later. And this is to wrap up this section. Well, Florian spoke about Rust already. I think what he's doing with Ferrocene at this point is pivotal for, getting Rust into our industry, right? That's the milestone that we have to pass before anyone can actually build a product there. As he mentioned, it's a couple of weeks away now, hopefully, to have that toolchain certifiable or certified specifically. I just brought something from another conference last year, which I found interesting back then in that same topic area. So everybody who has been around this industry and, projects using C to create safety applications knows about MISRA, right? Bunch of rules on top of C that you have to follow to even be potentially safe, because C is not a language that you want to use for that use case, actually. And I don't know, it's like 120-ish or something rules, I believe, whatever. The interesting takeaway from this presentation from CodeThink and Exeter last year at the Exeter Symposium is that essentially out of the box, like default vanilla Rust toolchain, like the compiler and the runtime guards that the language brings, takes care of, can read the numbers yourself, the vast majority of the MISRA rules. It's just in there by default, period. And combining that kind of statement, if you look into Rust in more depth, which I can recommend, looking at what that language does, looking at what Ferrocene does right now, I actually do think that a couple of years down the line, provocative statement, it might become not state of the art, which means something like negligence, maybe even, to create safety applications in C, really. Anyways, that's just me talking. So again, that's from the same presentation, things that, in this case, ISO 26262 asks you to do for a safety product, and tools, features, etc., that Rust brings out of the box to enable that. I'm a bit of a Rust fanboy right now. Anyways, that's our section. I don't know exactly how we will move forward, but we already have started a conversation in the TAC. I keep forgetting the abbreviation. Technical Advisory Meeting group about what a maturity model for Eclipse SDV projects might look like. That's not just going to be software quality, adoption, etc., is also going to be key. But part of something like a maturity model for us, I guess, will involve quality things. Let's see which and how. So that's one conversation that's already going on. And then, talking to all of you, to Dana, etc., I guess maybe Q3, latest end of the year, I do hope we can actually, have a dedicated conversation about that automotive grade thing, whatever we make of that. All right. Thank you for listening.